The continents are moving. Anybody who's paying attention will tell you this. And you don't have to be some sort of genius to see it. Pull up a map, any map, an old globe in your basement, Google Maps, anything at all, an online map, and study the map of the world. You don't have to memorize it, just kind of look and say, oh, that's what this looks like. And then go back and do it the next day, and do it the next day. Just spend 3 minutes a day looking at the map, and you'll start to notice things are changing. And there's two kinds of changes going on. Country names and borders are changing. That's the first type. And countries are changing shape. Islands are changing shape. Continents seem to be crawling all over the map. And I understand that some people will look at this idea and say it's confusing because they remember that Africa's always been this shape, or Australia's always been this shape, or Denmark's always been this shape. But this is why I suggest you don't trust what you always knew. You just look at a map every day. Because day by day these things are changing. And if you're willing to let go of your fear and your anger and your anxiety and just start looking at the map, you'll start saying, that's not what I remember. And then you do this day after day. I've only done this for maybe 3 months now, watching the map every day. But I've seen so many changes, and I think you can too. And when I say changes, if you look at the map, people will tell you it's always been that way. You can go down in the basement and find a dusty old globe that your grandfather used to have, or up in the attic, and you'll find exactly the same as what's on Google Map. All the maps are changing at the same time. But if you look at the map one day and look at it the next day, you'll see a change. Right? And I could give you examples, but I don't see the point. Either you're already seeing it, or you're one of those people who's too insecure to face the fact that the world's changing. And so let me talk to you who are already seeing it. Because most of you are asking a really obvious question, and that's why. Why has Australia moved so far west? Why has all of South America moved so far east? Why is Europe half the size it used to be? Right? And the reason that I call these two different kind of changes is easy. When a border changes, all that means is somewhere in the past, some puffed up bozo who called himself a king or a duke declared this would be the border. And history has changed in some ways, so one of the puffed up bozos wasn't king and another one was. This is just standard Mandela Effect for those who are paying attention. This country had a different leader. This war wasn't as violent. This village wasn't wiped out. All these changes that are happening in the Mandela process to make history less and less violent. And they go back more than 1 million years ago, some of them. But the result is that when you look at a border today, maybe it's different. Maybe it's just shifted a little bit. Like Germany seems to be getting a bit skinnier every day. And Poland seems to be pushing eastward and making Germany smaller. Switzerland now seems to have like a cow's udders hanging out from underneath it. Between Belgium and the Netherlands, there's a town with the screwiest borders in the world. And I'm pretty sure that town didn't exist just a little while ago, because we check it every day. And I live in the Netherlands. And suddenly there's this wonderful town with borders running all over the place. And enclaves and exclaves within exclaves, and it's crazy stuff, right? Those borders shift because of Mandela Effect changes. And it's easy to understand why. It's easy to figure it out. I hope it's easy. And I feel like maybe I belabor an obvious point. That a different king or a war that didn't happen or something would lead to slightly different changes. And that's why borders are different. Why there is a new canal across Denmark that was actually built in the 1700s, but I never heard of before last week. Right? That stuff you can understand. Now, I have suggested to you that someone, some group who really knows what to do, and people who are brilliant and wise and have the experience of thousands of lifetimes, have been traveling back in time and changing things. Let's stop this horrible event from happening. Let's make this more gentle. Let's make this more kind. Yeah, your history's still an ugly place in many places, but it's changing as this person, these people are traveling back in time and changing it. Right, and so you see how that might cause the Mandela Effect. It's one theory that many people have had, the Back to the Future, Lone Pine Mall theory. You can see how that would cause the Mandela Effect. But how does that make Australia move 1,000 kilometers to the west and north up almost to the equator? Australia is part of Southeast Asia with the Philippines and all of these crazy islands that sound like Pong and Padong and things. Australia's up there at the equator where all the islands are under jungle. This is crazy. And New Zealand, which used to be a single large island northeast of Australia, is now 2 islands southeast of Australia. And Denmark's one of the most fascinating. It seems to change almost every day. Denmark used to be really wide. It went from, if you don't know where Denmark is, just look at a map. It's all outlined by water, so it's really easy to see. Just search for it. It's easy. It used to be 2.5 times as wide as it is right now, and to stick straight up, north-south. And then it started to change. It got skinnier and skinnier, especially at the base. It started to move east to the right on a map towards Sweden, and there were these 3 big islands in there that you could sail boats around, and now one of those islands has gotten smashed into Denmark and you can't get boats through there anymore, and the other island is smashing into Sweden on the right, and in between there's less and less space, and it looks like if it keeps squeezing over the entirety of this sea area around Denmark and Sweden and northern Germany and all these places. This entire sea is going to be cut off from the North Sea and the oceans. It's going to become an inland sea, and that's really weird because it's changing every day, right? And nobody going back in time and convincing, the artist who painted the Mona Lisa that, she should be smiling. It wouldn't take much. You just put on the outfit of the time, a little floppy hat with a feather in it and a little too much velour. And you step through the door right behind the guy who's painting poor Mona Lisa, and you wink at her. And she giggles and she smiles just a little bit. Right? And the guy who's painting it says, "Oh, wow, I actually like that better." And so this time he paints her with just a hint of a smile. Right? That kind of change is easy. You can imagine someone doing it. But South America used to be below North America. And now it's moved, 2,000 kilometers to the right, towards Africa. And yeah, someone will say it's always been there. They're idiots. They're blind. More likely they're scared and don't want to see it. Anybody who's paying attention will tell you it's changed. Do you think maybe some time traveler went back in time and just kind of pushed the whole continent? And the next day pushed it a little more? It doesn't work that way. Scotland has an entire extra, sort of like a growth, a mohawk on the top of it now. and I saw something suggesting that that fault line, which is now where Lake Loch Ness is, that fault line is 200 million years old. Meaning, if that thing wasn't there when we started looking at the map and it is now, it changed 200 million years ago. Due to immense volcanic activity and crustal plates shifting and a bunch of stuff that none of us need to know about. Just a long, long time ago, right? No time traveler going back in his Delorean caused that. And so this, the second type of change going on to the maps, I'm hoping a lot of you are saying, what the hell is going on? Saying, I don't think CERN could move whole continents around. I don't think this is some alternate timeline. This is too big. They're not changing a country or a border or a smile. They're changing massive things that happened 200 million years ago. Hopefully you're asking that question. I have the answer if you want it. And the answer is simple, but it's weird. And it goes like this. First off, a lot of people talk about fourth dimension and fifth dimension like, they're floors in a building. You can just ride the elevator from the fourth dimension to the fifth dimension. And this is silly. Right? 2 dimensions is what a piece of paper looks like. It's flat. 3 dimensions is a box. Right? 4 dimensions is just a bigger box. So the 4th dimension isn't some magical fairyland that you can teleport to on your unicorn. Humanity isn't moving to the 5th dimension. That doesn't mean anything. Dimensions are mathematical. A 4th dimensional box is just bigger than a 3rd dimensional box. Right? And if you don't understand that, go back and read a book like Flatland or watch a YouTube video on Flatland and understand how a 2-dimensional person could understand your world. And the 4th dimension is just a bigger space. It's just this world with more added. Right? And educated people know this, but a lot of people start talking about, we're moving into a 4th dimension. We're moving into a magical world. And I'm going to talk about dimensions, and I don't want you to think I mean some mystic New Age mumbo-jumbo about the 5th dimension and the 9th ray from the butthole of Beetlejuice. I'm actually talking about math. Just, a box or a flat plane. Right? What a dimension actually is. And so here's how it works. Your world lives in more than 3 dimensions. If you talk to some people, they'll say it's 6 or 9. You can talk to, like the tall, goofy guy on the Big Bang Theory. People who do that kind of work with quarks and muons, they sometimes hypothesize 13 or 16 dimensions. Right? They don't mean there's 16 floors on an elevator that you in a building that you ride the elevator up. They don't mean 16 magical kingdoms you can ride your unicorn to. They just mean 16 mathematical dimensions. But see, humans can't see anything that complicated. They can see 3 of them. You can see up and down, you can see left and right, you can see front and back. And when you try to think about 4 dimensions, your brain kind of melts. It's not easy to think of more than 3 dimensions, right? But there are more of them. And the reason this matters is not that I'm just trying to pick on New Age people, because I think they're doing wonderful stuff, and I'm really proud of some of the stuff they're spreading in the world. I want to make sure you're not thinking, Mickey Mouse and Disney idea of dimensions or Chronicles of Narnia going through a wardrobe to a different dimension. I want to make sure you're thinking of math. So your 3-dimensional world and your 3-dimensional sun, they're moving around in a place that has 6 or 9 or 16 different dimensions. And there could be another 3-dimensional world right on top of yours. There could be, right? And you would never see it because it's using 3 of the dimensions you don't use. You've got 3, they've got another 3, that's 6 of the maybe 16. And if you could fold space and time so that you could move into one of those, into a slightly different dimension, you'd still be living in a three-dimensional space because that's all you understand. 4 dimensions will make your mind go screwy, right? You'd be living in a three-dimensional space, but you'd lose one of the ones you have. Right? You'd lose left and right, and then the plane that's in front of you and backing you up and down. That plane you would still hold on to, but you'd bring in a 4th dimension, which, would you be living in a world that would be just like this one, just 3-dimensional. But it'd just be different 3, a different one of the 3. Right? And if that hasn't confused everybody, then I'm not trying hard enough. Because I find all that dimension stuff screwy and had real trouble back in school when I studied it. But you can go back and find any math text or videos on YouTube talking about what dimensions are. They're not magical lands. So let's just, to be easy, say that your world's moving in a space of 6 dimensions. Just because, 16, I don't know, that just sounds like too much for people to think about. There's your 3 dimensions, and there's 3 more that aren't being used. A long, long time ago, something happened. Now, that long time ago really might have been as little as 12 or 13,000 years. It might be longer. But something cataclysmic happened, a major event. And at the very least, it caused massive flooding and wiped out the population of much of the world. And this isn't mumbo-jumbo, this is science. You can watch anybody talking about the end of the last ice age and the sudden ice melts and the wiping out of the woolly mammoths and such. It's just history I'm talking about. But here's where I'm not talking about standard history. When this happened, it broke your world. And it broke it in a very strange way. And alright, when I talk about this stuff, I sound as crazy about the New Agers riding their purple unicorns between dimensions. That's okay. I'm alright with sounding crazy, because, I probably am. Or at least I have been. I've practiced it. The world broke. And rather than shattering into a lot of pieces like the planet that was once there and is now the asteroid belt, what happened is it sort of bent and folded, and large pieces of it got twisted off so that one of the dimensions is still tied to your world, but the other 2 are facing somewhere else, to some of the other dimensions. And if you had the ability to make this, to perceive a 4th dimension and step across, you could be walking in a new world. Right here where yours is. And it's your world. It's just whole slices of it are bent and twisted out of shape. And while this might seem crazy, other people have described this same thing. There's a there's an interesting teenage television show based on some books by Cassandra Clare called City of Bones and City of Ashes and so on, about a bunch of pretty teenagers who hunt vampires and monsters. And the description in this book of their homeland is a huge place the size of Germany that's folded. So only if you have a special magical tool that lets you see the fold can you cross over. And you can go from, I think it's Germany, going east into Poland, and a normal person would take 1 step and be across the border. But if you have this magic tool that lets you bend, you can then turn down and find this folded place and have their entire country, which is the size of Germany, and spend several days riding your horse or whatever across it. And when you come to the other end of it and have this special tool, you can step out of it and be in Poland. And so there's an entire country, the width of Germany, between Germany and Poland. This is how Cassandra describes it in her book. And this is exactly how I describe it. And you can find other people in your world who've described things like this. You can also find some of the fear porn type TV shows and movies where, these worlds are smashing together and we're all going to die, or we have to kill them before they kill us, The shadow nonsense from your past. You can find some of those, and some of them are interesting shows, but this one from Cassandra Clare is beautiful. If you haven't read it, maybe take a look at it, because what she describes is exactly how it is. And so all over your world, because of this, it was like taking a great big paper ball, like one of those big lamps you get from IKEA that's made all of paper with a light bulb in the middle, and somebody just took and kind of crumpled it up. And so now there are all these folded places that you can't see anymore because they're folded into, two different dimensions. They're still in 3 dimensions, but different ones, right? They're all kind of smushed and folded. And if you're really, really good, if you're a little bit meta-intuitive, sometimes you can find one of these folds and sit and watch it very carefully, and you can almost see into a different world. And it's fascinating. All of the stories that you know of from, say, the myths of Europe, of the fairy and the mushroom rings that let you walk through to a different world. Things like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where you walk through a wardrobe and you're in a different world. The Peter Pan idea. The idea that you can just hop up into the air and fly a little bit and be in a different world. All of these things are referring to this idea that your earth was crumpled up and parts of it are just folded out of your 3 dimensions. And what's happening right now, because some very powerful, powerful creatures have decided, is that this world's being healed. It's being uncrumpled. Like taking this crumpled up ball of paper and returning it to being this beautiful origami construct. And if you just took and ripped it open, it would cause all kinds of chaos and messiness. And so it's more like untying a Gordian knot than it is just smoothing it out. Because you have to untie one little piece and let it unfold, and untie another, and if you get it wrong, other things get twisted. And the untying is resulting in your world changing. And what's going to happen is your world's going to be, not twice the size it is, but perhaps close to that. It's going to be much larger as all of these lands unfold and come back. And in getting ready for that, a lot of things here are changing. You used to be able to look at a map and see, or a globe and see land everywhere. Now you can turn the globe or Google Earth and one entire side is blue, right? It's all water. South America's moved east, Australia's moved west. It's like, some big fat guys come through and say, all right, make room, and nudged everybody aside. Right? China's big belly's been smushed in and gotten smaller, and the United States and Canada being shoved off to the right, and now the entire half of the planet is just water. Why? Because a lot of new land is going to unfold in this origami process of putting your world back together. And if you start up at the North Pole, say on Google Maps, and follow, there's a massive scar underground that kind of curves around and goes through, Ascension Island, and right next to Svalbard, and that one weird, creepy island called Jan Mayen. And just all the way down, and just this one huge scar, just like a zipper. Like a zipper all the way through the entire Atlantic Ocean, north and south. North Pole almost to South Pole. And I think what's going to happen is out of that scar, some new land is going to unfold. I won't promise you that, because all this stuff sounds crazy. I'm just telling you the mythology. That your earth was big, it had this catastrophe, it didn't just get flooding and tornadoes and hurricanes, it actually got crumpled in pieces, folded out of your 3 dimensions, and now they're unfolding and coming back. And if there are any of those, flat earth type people that think earth is a placemat on God's coffee table somewhere, you can still do this. If Earth is only 2-dimensional, somebody could still crumple it up, and you can, in your worldview, you can still see what I'm talking about. Or if you think the Earth is a diamond or a square or a cube or whatever little fantasy you have of how it is. It's all fantasy. We're all just making our world up, so don't take it personal. The fact that it's round is fantasy. We're all just explaining our world as we come across it. Right, so whatever your particular interpretation, your mythology, your ideas of God or science or whatever, understand that this is how it is and what's happened. And I encourage you not to believe me, but to go sit quietly, maybe under a tree, and kind of close your eyes and try and feel. Just get a feel for what's the truth, without all the fear and the nonsense. And maybe you'll be able to feel some of what I've talked about. And then you can imagine your world not just randomly shifting continents around like some, crazy gods are playing billiards, but rather begin to imagine it. Just imagine as this beautiful process of repairing it, of taking this crumpled ball, like one of those blow-up kiddie swimming pools that are, real tiny little things, but you blow them up, put water in, and 3 and 4-year-olds splash in and think it's the greatest thing in the whole world. It's like one of those kiddie swimming pools, but with a hole in it. It's kind of crumpled in the backyard, and the kids look at it and they're all sad. It's like somebody's patched the hole and they're pumping it up. And all the children are watching with great big eyes as it slowly goes from this crumpled hunk of rubber to more and more like a pool with, little cartoon dolphins drawn on it. They're getting really excited, and, the hose is putting water in there, and they know very soon they'll be able to jump and splash in. That's what's happening to your world. This origami unfolding. Somebody with a big pump, pumping it back up so that all this missing land comes back, so that Atlantis shows up again. And I think there have been more books written about Atlantis than almost any other subject in the world. And it entertains me that if you're not a Mandela person, when Atlantis comes back, these millions of people who've been talking about it for years aren't going to say, yay, Atlantis is back. They're going to say, well, that's always been there. And they're not even going to see it. And I just think that's a great little joke that if you're not awake, you're going to miss the cool stuff. But for those who are awake, they're going to say, oh my God, Atlantis is back, it's real, Plato was right, and you're going to see all these other things. And the world is going to continue to change, and change a lot, until it finishes unfolding. And whether it's 50% or 70% or 80% bigger, it's going to be bigger. There's going to be a lot more land. There's going to be a lot more inland seas. There are not going to be any jungles. Jungles aren't so bad. There may be less jungles, but there are not going to be any deserts. Right? Deserts are terrible, terrible things. They're a scar on the land, and most of them are fairly recent. Only the last few thousand years these deserts have showed up. As things are put back together, your earth is going to be warmer. Yeah, global warming, terrible, oh my God, no. All that fear porn, forget that. Your earth is going to be warmer, and it's going to be more stable. It's likely that seasons will be less aggressive. You won't have it 100 degrees in the summer and negative 100 degrees in the winter. Or if you're a Celsius person, 40 degrees in the summer and negative 100 degrees in the winter. You won't have that. Temperatures will be more stable. There will be less hurricanes, less violence, less earthquakes. Because your earth isn't crumpled up into a knot anymore, and a lot of these shifting plates won't happen. Now, I understand that if you're a geologist and you know about crustal plate shifting and all those things I said people don't need to know about, you're going to think I'm crazy. That's fine. Here's what will happen for you. All the stuff I've said will happen. And you'll just be a geologist in that new world. And you'll have written the same silly books that 7 people in the whole world will actually have read because nobody cares about. You will just have described the world that it's become. And you'll still be as closed-minded as you are. Because this is how scientists work. So enjoy the changes. And if you don't see them, that's fine. Go back to your little books and imagine your crustal plates and be happy with yourself, because nobody else will. I don't like scientists, but I don't want you to be scared of scientists. Scientists are saying, this Mandela Effect is delusion, it's nonsense, it's a bunch of stupid people making things up. They're saying, horrible things are going to happen and you're all going to be terribly afraid, and the only way that you can be healthy and happy is to give all your money to your governments and live in poverty and fear. And I don't like scientists. I don't like people who spread fear. I want to find those people who spread joy and happiness and fun. People who can laugh at the scientists and say, I don't take you seriously. Right? People who can talk to these global warming nutters and say, you know what, back in the 80s or early 90s, you said the North Pole was going to melt and we'd all be dead. Well, the North Pole's gone, and we're not dead. You said that the temperature rose 2 degrees, there would be earthquakes and floods and we'd all die. And yet you tell us that in the Middle Ages, just a few hundred years ago, the temperature rose 7 to 10 degrees. And it was a time of great peace and prosperity and wonder in the world. I'm telling you, the world's going to rise in temperature a few degrees. But it's not going to be something terrible. A lot of the things wrong with your world, like deserts, are going to fade away. A lot of the troubles like hurricanes or earthquakes are going to become far less. Your world's going to return to a place it used to be, only better. And this is why Australia is moving.